All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samantha Putnam, and I'm the Executive Director for Alumni Affairs at UC Santa Barbara. So happy that you could join us this afternoon for the next installment of our Gaucho Academy series on public speaking. We've been doing this series for a year now and are thrilled to bring topics to our alumni community that hopefully help you in your everyday work life, in your professional lives, in your personal life. Today, we are very fortunate to have alumna Bridget Kyeremateng present to us on public speaking. I'm going to share with you her bio. I want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and so we will share that out after the fact. And we will also have time at the end for Q&A, and we're going to use the Q&A chat feature for those questions. So to begin with, I'm going to share with you Bridget's bio. Bridget is a global storyteller, marketing strategist, and cultural enthusiast who challenges the status quo. As the current senior manager of inclusive marketing at Twitch, she executes campaigns that amplify underserved communities on the platform. Born in Italy to Ghanaian parents, Bridget spent 15 years as an undocumented immigrant in the US, inspiring her career in highlighting intersectional talent from Spotify to Tumblr and now at Twitch. As a recent Forbes 30 Under 30 listee, Bridget has significantly impacted the marketing industry, working on high-stakes productions for Nestlé, leading social impact campaigns at Tumblr with brands such as HuffPost, Maker's Army, leading Spotify's marketing campaigns, working with various talents such as Big Freedia, Jason Mraz, and Carly Uchis, and regaining Twitch's inclusive marketing efforts. Bridget knows no bounds to storytelling. A vivacious public speaker, Bridget's TEDx speech about her undocumented experience as a Black woman in the United States demonstrates her underlying passion and goal to share stories of those who deserve to be heard. Bridget is a published Forbes author with articles in OK Africa, Novella, Salty, and Driven Society, and has been featured in Afropunk, Adweek, NYU Stern School of Business. And she graduated, of course, from UC Santa Barbara with degrees in Black Studies and Feminist Studies, and she currently resides in Brooklyn. I had the privilege of meeting Bridget in New York this past spring, and I'm just so excited to share her talents and experience with you because it was just such a treat to meet with her in person, and I can definitely testify to her public speaking abilities because she was thrust in at one of our events and asked to speak in front of our audience. So handing over to you, Bridget. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Samantha. And honestly, I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so thankful for UC Santa Barbara for still seeing me and allowing me to come to this space. I'm so thrilled to see everyone here. Hey, Gauchos. And I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this for such a long time. And thank you for allowing me to be back here in this space.
Wonderful. So we have some questions for you today. It will be just a casual conversation. And as I mentioned to our audience, we'll have time for Q&A for them at the end. So just to start with, I mean, your bio is so incredibly impressive, but bring that to life a little bit for us and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, and obviously a little about your experience at UCSB.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Oh, man, it's fascinating to think about how much time has moved, especially because I wasn't born here, but America is my home. And so therefore, a lot of what I've been doing in this world, especially when I went to UC Santa Barbara and then now here in New York, is about just reclaiming my time and reclaiming my space. So as Samantha mentioned, I am a global storyteller. I don't like to define myself by just my role at my job because I want to expand out of that. So as a global storyteller, that means that I share my stories through either my work, through campaigns, and supporting underserved creators, whether as big as Jason Mraz or as small as our streaming content creators on Twitch. I love to use platforms such as like Instagram and TikTok to share things about like my plans or traveling or just moments of experiences that I have, whether it is talking about something like my undocumented journey or just being a Black woman in this space. And so many of these conversations really started to come to fruition when I went to UC Santa Barbara. So just a bit of a background, I was born in Italy, then lived in California, and I was undocumented at the time. In 2012, you, as an undocumented person, couldn't really go to college without being noticed as like a foreign exchange student. So I had to pay out-of-state tuition. And I got really lucky under DACA and DREAM Act that I was able to go to UC Santa Barbara with in-state tuition and be able to work on the side. And I was originally a film and media studies major, and I thought I want to be a reporter. I mean, like, duh, right? Like, if I could get paid to speak, I'd be a millionaire, not a billionaire, because there aren't any ethic billionaires out there. And I didn't realize at the time that UC Santa Barbara was more of a research-based institution. And so while researching film and media was really exciting, I couldn't practice the act of speaking, and I couldn't practice the act of like, what am I feeling and what am I realizing and learning? And so I ended up taking a class in Black Studies with Dr. George Lipsitz. And that class in Black Studies then inspired me to go into feminist studies, which then made me realize there are so many stories out there that are being unheard. And I have this ability to yap like no other person. Isn't there a way that I could possibly create a future or opportunity for other creators and people who want to be seen and want to be heard through my jobs? And so I had the privilege of moving to New York, whole other situation. It took me a long time to get to where I am now, but moving to New York then challenged me to be able to work at places like Tumblr and Spotify and now Twitch. And I have a very privileged position to now allow people to speak about their stories while also making sure that I also demonstrate and share my stories as well.
Thank you. What would you say was the moment where your passion for public speaking really ignited? I mean, I know clearly you're a natural. I think we've had some really great response to this this webinar, and I think part of that is so many of us in our professional worlds get thrown into public speaking, and certainly for me, it took me a while before I wasn't like crippled with anxiety in my stomach or my voice would shake. You know, aside from being a natural, what was the moment where your passion for public speaking really came to life?
So I think I realized it when I was in theater. So I've been in theater for quite some time. I started in musical theater, then I did theater. I did the vagina monologues at UCSB all 4 years. And, you know, the art of speaking, the art of engaging with an audience was always so fascinating to me. But I didn't realize that people actually do this for their living. There are people who go to coaches. There are people who like go to public speaking classes to figure out how do you exert your voice? How do you project? How do you create a sentence or a paragraph or a story that encapsulates your audience? I didn't realize that that was a thing. So there was a class actually at UCSB that I took. It was like a seminar, and we had to actually practice like how to create and modify a public speaking sort of like event. And that's when I realized like, oh, I could actually, if I continue to do this forever and ever, I could actually make this into a job. And that's when I realized, yes, I could do theater for the rest of my life. Like I would love to be Viola Davis. I would love to just get an Oscar. I would love to stay in like the theater world, but it's not a sustainable career. And I sort of started to figure out where are some opportunities where I can start speaking. And some of you all might know, but I was the commencement speaker at UC Santa Barbara for my graduating class. And that was a moment where I thought, okay, I actually have to practice now. I actually have to, I'm speaking to thousands of students and parents and faculty members. I have to really create a speech, because when you're in theater, you have a script. You have a script, you can maybe like, create your own words here and there. But at this point in moment, I had to truly create an entire story, but an inspirational story for our community. So it's not as if public speaking to me is where I'm not sometimes crippled by anxiety, but it is something that I've practiced so much that I truly do it in my sleep. You can ask my fiance, he's always like, you're saying things in your sleep. Who are you talking to? But that's when I realized is really when I realized that theater was the moment where I was thrusted into a stage, but then having to be a commencement speaker was the first time that I had to truly create a script and to deliver it. And you only had one chance to do it. And it was really figuring out like, how do you create that story? And how do you want to exude that story? How do you want the audience to feel? And from then on, and it's been a pleasure to be able to have these moments, to continue to public speak, to do the TEDx moments, and just continue to craft that. It's like not even like riding a bike or swimming. It's like gymnastics. You just have to keep doing it, and you just keep getting better with time.
I'm glad you brought up gymnastics because I hope we're really excited for Team USA today. Woo! Tell us a little bit about process, right? You touched on it there. So as someone that's either, maybe perhaps nervous for speaking or as a beginner, you've got this written word, you can write a script, you can use AI and AI will give you the script back or the written piece on your topic. But what's a good process to go through to where maybe combat nerves or to take that written piece off the page and transform it into something that's digestible for the audience, that they can receive it in a way that sounds interesting and not just sort of someone stood there reading. And talk to us a bit about process there.
Yeah. So the first thing that you want to understand is who is your audience. There is no point in speaking if you don't know who you're speaking to. So if you're speaking for young adults, children, there is a way that you have to connect with them through your speech and even the writings that you create, right, for your speech in order to resonate with them. So for the TEDx talk that I did, my audience were fifth graders and eighth graders. So how do you connect with them? There are so many things I had written that just wouldn't resonate with them at all. So finding out who your audience is the most important thing. The second thing that I think people forget is you need to know your speech. You need to know your speech. You don't have to memorize it, but you need to know a good 80% of it. The purpose and the hope is that you should be speaking to your audience as if you never once saw your script. Does that make sense? You shouldn't be like reading it out, and it shouldn't be so memorized that you're kind of like, "Hi, my name is this and I do this." It's, "Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is this and I do that." So understanding the structure of your speech is incredibly important. Is the intro short? Is it really long? Are we going into a story? Are we talking about data? If we have data, then we're going to need some paper, right? We're going to need something to hold so that you know sort of like the data that's coming out, and make sure that you feel like you are not rambling or speaking out of your, arse, for a different word, but you want to know what is the structure of your speech. Is the first part incredibly exciting? Is the second part a bit more solemn? Is the third part a bit more logistical? Understanding that then allows you to then create how you're going to speak through your story. The third part that I think is incredibly important is actually printing your speech and annotating it. Okay, we're right back to college, we're right back to high school. You got to annotate your speech. Looking at particular words where you can inflect your voice a little higher, looking at places where you have to be a bit more serious, finding ways that you can be a little slower, reading it out loud, then also allows you to figure out, are there certain sentence structures that I can't really read, right? In the sense of, am I slurring my words? Am I am I just learning my words a lot? I think I have that issue with like S's. I had braces for a bit, so I'm retraining my mouth how to use the word S. So finding particular sentences where you go, okay, I need to really practice that a lot. And before your speech, anyone seen High School Musical where like Sharpay and like her friend are like doing like ma ma ma? Those particular intonations and doing tongue twisters, you would never think that they're helpful, but they truly are. So I do want to talk about a little bit about preparing your voice, which is, I think, something that people don't really discuss when it comes to public speaking. It's like, yes, know your script and who's your audience. How are you preparing your voice? So for me, my singing voice is an alto, so I have a very deep register. So I know that when I have to speak, I have to breathe in very deeply. So what is your singing voice? What is your speaking voice, right? What are some words and sentences and paragraphs? Like, you just need to figure out, how does Bridget speak? How does Samantha speak? And that, I think, is the creative and fun part about public speaking, because it is an art form, right? You're taking a sentence, which I'll just say, my room is white. My room is white. My room is white. My room is white. So figuring out what your tone is just allows public speaking to feel a bit more fun and less more daunting. Find out who your audience is allows it to feel a bit more personable. And knowing your script, knowing your speech allows you to feel more like a professional and someone who knows what they're talking about.
Wonderful. I found reading out loud to my kids has really helped me explore my
Yes.
different my style of speaking. Taking it back a little bit, I think practice is fantastic, right? But there's always a moment where nerves just take over. I'll just confess my biggest nervousness is going around a room and being the last one to just have to say, my name is, and here's a fun fact about myself. It's terrifying. So when anxiety or that feeling just takes over, do you have has that ever happened to you? Do you have any kind of quick fixes that really you've found to be helpful? Because public speaking can really just be sometimes saying your name.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think this goes into like what you can do daily to allow yourself to feel like when something is called upon you that
Daily practices.
yes, you can kind of like jump right into it. So I get nervous a lot. I think for me, and I'll share this as an example because maybe folks might feel connected to it. When I was a kid, I really thought that stuttering was cool. So I practiced how to stutter. And so now at my age now, there's certain times where I just like get stuck in like a stuttering spree. It's really odd. And I know exactly when I did it, I was like 12 years old. So when I get tied up on my words, I stutter. And that to me is kind of like oh God, like, why did I just do that? For me, and for anyone who maybe has like a stuttering problem, the thing that I like to do is I like to just stop speaking very quickly and just say the word again. And that's because a lot of folks feel very nervous about speaking. And so if you stutter a bit and you just kind of compose yourself and then start over, I mean, that's better than anyone else, right? Because sometimes when you go, oh man, I didn't mean to do that, now you've taken away the entire focus on you to the fact that you messed up. Most people don't even catch that, right? So for me, it's a stuttering problem. If you kind of get choked up on your words, really important to just take a moment of a deep breath, and just going, okay, I'm going to start over. People are truly, truly forgiving, and people are just not going to judge you for doing something that is incredibly terrifying, like public speaking. Something as simple as just like, hi, my name is Bridget, and the fun fact about myself is that X, Y, and Z, right? Third thing I like to do if I find myself like getting nervous, and I think a lot of you all would agree, is you start to speak really fast. When you are nervous, like you're not breathing, you're like pulling out all your words. And when you start to realize that, you really want to just start to dial it back a little bit and just take a deep breath and let's start over again. You keep hearing me say start over, and that's because you can. There is no rule in the public speaking world that you just can't go, I'm just going to do it again. It's just, I think, the way that you want to react to yourself. I think for anyone here who does yoga, you always hear about how it's not about how you do it, it's about just doing it. And so if you do mess up and you just go, okay, try again, people respect you for that because they feel like, oh, wow, like I can also do that too. And I didn't know that I didn't have to be perfect when I could speak. And another thing that I try to help with myself too, like a daily thing, filler words, filler words. You're going to hear that forever. Our filler words are like, I was going to say just right now, and I had to take a moment to just breathe. Like, our filler words are so easy to use. And I want to remind people that you should be able to use filler words. You are a human. We're not supposed to be robots. But if you do have a particular presentation that you're excited to present, or you have something that you want to do, think about practicing it and just counting how many times you say or how many times you say like, and trying to figure out what are some words I can use in replacement of that. This is a very, very hard thing to do. And I'm telling you this as someone who loves public speaking, who's done it. It is a very, very, very hard thing to do. And it takes a lot of practice to think about taking a moment to break and not, you know what I mean? It takes a lot of that. So that's something that I try to think about daily. For me, my favorite word is like. You will hear me say like all the time because it's like, why not? It's just fun. But when I start to get into positions where I have to like speak and present, I got to remove that like and use somewhat or similarly to, so that it doesn't sound like exactly. You see how that comes out. It's just something that happens. And it's just, for me, it's an intentional thought of how I can continue to practice, be a bit more intentional on the things I want to say.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about storytelling, and I think that's really easy to think about storytelling in relation to sort of making a public speech.
Yeah.
But what about times when how important is storytelling, or how can you incorporate storytelling into maybe a presentation where you've got a small audience, or even maybe in an interview, where there are these forms of public speaking that aren't necessarily the mass, commencement speech, but but how can you incorporate storytelling into those opportunities as a way to perhaps relax yourself, or to make yourself more relatable?
Yeah, that's a great question. Storytelling is incredibly important. We are humans after all. So you have to find what are the 2 or 3 things that you really like love about yourself, or that you find really like fascinating, and finding ways to integrate that. So I think I'll try to figure out. I really love using my story about being undocumented because, one, it's rare that you meet Black women who are undocumented and Black women who were born in Italy. So that to me is a very rare story. And I want to make sure that people know that, because it just changes the way that people perceive you and perceive the way you speak or your success. So I try to find 2, 3 things that I want to talk about. And let's say that I'm doing a presentation about, I'm going to make this up because we're going to do this on the fly, about plants. Okay. Someone invited me to talk about plants, and how do I find a way to create a story about plants? The first thing I would do is find a connection for me and plants. So I live in New York City. It's a concrete jungle. We have man-made parks, and I used to live in California, and it was just an abundance of nature everywhere, and I took that for granted. Now I moved to New York, and I have like 25 huge plants in my apartment. So then you would structure your speech around a personal story of your connection with said thing. So I'm Bridget, I live in New York City, it's a concrete jungle. And at some point I realized I really love plants, and I took living in California for granted. And then I go into why are plants important for you or the world. So you want to start off with what is your connection of said topic? And there will always be a connection. And you asked, why is it important? A lot of us want to feel connected to our speaker. That's the only way that people want to listen to you, is that they find a sort of connection. If you sort of just speak facts and you just like talk about very like verbose things, people get tired, they get bored. You really only have like 10 to 15 seconds to like reel them in. So if you connect something personal, now I know I'm talking to a human. Now I know I'm talking to someone who actually prepared or like was thoughtful or intentional about their speaking time. And then 3, I'm actually very interested in this conversation now. You also don't want to just keep your story at the top. You got to weave it in back somewhere, right? Maybe talk about a plant that you really like at home, that you find really easy to grow, or when you bought a plant, a very expensive plant, and it somehow died. Now let's talk about how to take care of plants. You want to weave it in, because you will lose people at some point. And how do you bring them back? Talk about a moment that you experience that you can connect back to people. For as long as you can remember, just like the art of like history is storytelling, right? If you love reading like the Bible, the Quran, or any of these like incredible, beautiful, like historical books, they are weaved in with stories. It's the only reason why people feel so connected to them. So when I think about public speaking, I think about creating a story, I think about what is my audience and how do I connect myself through them so it feels authentic, intentional, and fun for me. It's got to feel fun. Otherwise, you're just going to be waiting for it to end. You're looking at the time. So storytelling is so important, and it allows you to feel more connected about what you're saying as well.
Thank you. We're going to do a little sandwich here. Can you share some memorable experiences of public speaking, a not so good, one, and how you recovered from that, and then one that you just felt really lifted up from, and what were the key takeaways from that, from each of those experiences that you've threaded into, your work now?
Good question. I think I definitely want to share a public speaking moment where I just thought like, man, that was rough. Because there's been a lot of rough ones, because you need rough ones to figure out how to do better, right? None of this is perfect. We're always working, we're always figuring out how to do it. I had a particular presentation at work about a year and a half ago when I had just started. First of all, I had no idea who I was talking to. I didn't know who my audience was. I had never met any of these employees, and we work mostly remote. And the way that I can connect is if I meet you in person, we're besties for life. But didn't know any of these people. And I had to figure out, how do I talk about this particular project that I know the information of, I'm very passionate about, to people who I don't know. I don't even know if they're paying attention. Cameras were off. It was just like nerve-wracking for me. I got to see your expression. And I got on the call and I was stuttering. I was talking too fast. I kept saying, like, oh, 1 second, got to do this. I got to share my camera. And it was a hot mess for me, right? Because people, half the time, they're not listening. For me, it felt like a hot mess. And what saved me was that in that call, I had to call in somebody and just, can you take over this call for a little bit? They were just running the next part of the speech or the meeting per se. And I just needed, I turned off my camera. I took a couple minutes to breathe. I then went on the side of my notes app and just wrote like the 3 or 4 things I knew I had to get out of that call. Just kind of reconfigured myself. And then when I got back on, it was, thank you so much. Now we're going to talk about our next 3 topics. And now I'm going to speak a little slower. And now I'm going to be a bit more intentional. And I'm going to wait. Anyone have any questions? Just to give myself a moment to breathe. So a lot of the mistakes that end up happening for me, if I can call someone else to just take a moment to, hey, can you just reroute this particular slide? You can then reconfigure, come right back on. People are going to forgive you. They really are. I would say my most exciting and most fulfilling speech that I had done was my recent TEDx speech that I did in January in Santa Barbara. And that one, I only had a month to prepare for. They reached out to me in December. I was confirmed December 15th, and the talk was January 31st. And TEDx is just, it's a dream come true. It is a dream come true. It's the biggest stage in the world. And I was asked to create a story with a theme. The theme was Spark. Now, what does that mean? What is Spark? Like, that was probably the hardest thing I have ever had to write. And I had to think about, who's my audience? Okay, I'm speaking to these people. What do I want to talk about? I went through so many different rounds of reviews of how I wanted to speak. And I practiced at the LAX airport. I practiced on the Santa Barbara airport, Airbus. I practiced. And at some point, usually for me, the rule of thumb is about 12 hours before I do a public, like if I do a speech, I don't read the script anymore. It's already here. And I was grateful enough that I got there and I got to practice on the stage. So got to figure out, what's my walking set? Like, how far can I walk? How close can I walk? Can I hold a water bottle? Can I not? All these moments where I was able to just figure out my stage was really helpful for me. And once I got on, and I think a lot of people feel this way too, if you're preparing for something like really big, whether it's something like 100-person like in-person meeting, or if it's like a 3-person fireside panel chat, something as small as that, once you're on stage, you really want to like let go. You really want to allow who you are, your personality, really take charge. That's when people start to realize, like, oh, this is really fun. Oh, I can see who I'm talking to now. So once I got on stage and just started speaking, yeah, there was a couple of mistakes. The slide didn't move, but I knew my script, I knew my speech. So I kind of, and the most important thing too is looking at people, eye contact, scanning the room. It also gives you a moment to just like get away from someone who might be like looking at you a little too intensely. And if you're having like an issue with speaking, if you need a moment to breathe, you could just look to the side and then, breathe out. So I loved it. And it, to me, is one of my greatest accomplishments to be able to have done that and to have spoken about my story at such a large stage. But it made me realize that there are so many people who deserve to be on that stage and to speak about their stories. And that high is forever with me now. And I really want people to continue to experience, like, when you're up there and you've done your thing and you know who you are, there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else. And again, as small as a 100-person meeting, 20-person meeting, 2-person meeting, or as big as a commencement speak, it's, your art form is yours and you want to own that to the best of your ability.
Thank you. You've touched on this a little bit, and it reminded me of something. I used to work dealing with complaints, and I'd have these uncomfortable conversations. And one of the great pieces of advice I was giving was just embrace the silence, right? Like there's some power in being comfortable in the silence. And you kind of mentioned, right, like these deep breaths. What would you say are your top three like power plays to, to take back the room, to take back the moment, to feel in command when you got that person looking at you funny? What are your top three little tactics that help you reclaim that space?
Oh, that's a really good question. You bring it up. The first one is like the silence. So whether you are in an uncomfortable conversation with someone, whether you're on a stage, whether you're in a meeting, and you just need a moment to just like, you just look at someone, you just breathe, give it 3 seconds. So usually another example is if you're in a meeting, and you go, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, sounds good. That's a long time for me, but I'm breathing through the entire time. I'm breathing, I'm smizing a little bit, I'm looking at the chat. And then after that, you just kind of let it go. It's such a power play because people now are like, do I have a question? do I? Maybe I do. It just gives people time to just also think. So first it's that opportunity to just take a moment and ask a question in silence. The second one for me is, this is going to sound really odd, but jokes. To me, jokes not only reclaim my time because now people are laughing, so I got a moment to breathe, but it snaps people out of the sort of like intensity of the conversation. So I throw in a couple of jokes here and there just for funsies, and it just gives me a moment to just also laugh, let go. Laughing is such a great like endorphin and serotonin release. So it's really helpful for your brain and your nervous system to realize like, this is okay. You're not going to die because you're talking. And the third one, if you are able to move, walk. So if you're on like a standing desk, if you could just like walk a little bit while you're speaking. If you're in front of a room, never stand still. It is not great for your nervous system. Your body is in fight or flight. It's in fight or flight. So a couple of paces, moving your hands a little bit. I'm Italian, so I do a lot of this, but for this call, I had to really keep it on my knee because it would have been all over the place. So yeah, moments of silence, a joke, and being able to walk are ways that I reclaim my time and space so that I don't feel like a robot and I don't feel as if I'm in an uncomfortable position, whether it is a challenging like talk I'm doing with someone one-on-one, a very heavy conversation, or a very heavy speech.
Thank you, Bridget. Those were great tips, and we didn't have that lined up in our questions, so I threw you on the spot there. But you really teed us up for, we're going to enter into Q&A shortly. I have one more question for you, but I do want to, I'm going to directly look at our audience now, encourage our audience to think about what are your questions for Bridget that I can put to her. But the final question I want to talk about, and timing is perfect, is closing statement. How do you, whether it's an interview, whether it's a presentation with PowerPoint, whether it's a Zoom, whatever it might be, if it's a TEDx, how do you think about closing and leaving, a lasting impression? And I think in a world that's moving so quickly, and as you said, people are distracted, they're lost. What are your tactics for a lasting impression?
I love that question because I always say that public speaking is selling yourself. I think it's a moment to sell who you are, your personality, what you bring to the table, your values, your beliefs. That's what public speaking is. It doesn't matter what space or floor it is. So ending it has to really be as strong as starting it. And I really love the concept of bringing it back to yourself, humanizing yourself. So if it's something as simple as an interview, it's reminding that person why you are the best candidate for this position. You've done this, you've done this, you've done that, and you're going to help this particular company move into here. So it's a lot about just bringing it back into yourself. If it's for a TEDx, it's for a big speech, it's rounding out your thoughts very quickly because people just get tired again. So rounding it out, here's this one or two things that I really want you to take away. If there's one particular, piece of advice, I would say this. And this is why, and that is the end. So it's really bringing it back to yourself, really humanizing who you are, making sure that the audience is aware that you've listened to them, that you've caught them. And then just in the end, I always say a very, very good thank you is very strong. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. That is such a beautiful way to close because you're showing gratitude that people took their time to listen to you. You're right, Samantha. This world is moving quickly and our attention spans are terrible now. And so being in gratitude is a very, very strong skill to obtain and to let people know that your time is precious. So thank you for being here.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have some good questions coming in for you. So starting off, are there any books, videos, or something online that helped you to learn how to crack good jokes during presentation?
Oh man. So I don't have any at the top of my head, but I actually love watching speeches of particular like people that I love. So one of my favorites are Ava DuVernay. She's a director. I love listening to Viola Davis speak. So I try to look at particular people who look like me because most of the time they will create and provide stories that feel very similar to like my Black women experience. So YouTube is really what I do. And before I do any big sort of moments, so like the commencement or TEDx, I went through and I watched a lot of different videos of how people were sort of like sharing their story and talking and using the inflections of their voices. But I would say, yeah, I just love watching people speak because then it allows me to sort of look at what they're doing, any mistakes that they might have, and any ideas that I might be able to take on. So, and I'm a visual person, so I have to visualize that.
Thank you. And hopefully this doesn't happen often, but how do you handle mean-spirited questions? Something rooted in misogyny, racism, things like that. Have you ever been put in that position and how do you handle it? Or how would you if you have been fortunate enough not to?
It's a really great question. And unfortunately, I have had a lot of experiences with it because of the role that I currently hold and really the roles that I've held for about 8 years. As a Black woman in this space, it's an unfortunate reality that we are sometimes seen as like punching bags for people's own, misogyny and racism and sexism. It's also a place where people might ask particular questions that they don't want to ask anyone else, but they know that they could ask someone like myself because I'm in this particular role. And the first thing I'll mention from like an emotional human side is that it is a lot and it can take a toll. The other thing I try to remember is that a lot of these questions are coming from not a place of me, and mostly it's a projection. So the way that I try to handle these answers is really from the practice of just the art of public speaking and making sure that I take in people's perception and go, okay, thank you so much for sharing that. From my perspective, here is why this is wrong. Here's why this is inappropriate. And here's some things that you could do to better fix your judgment. And that sort of separation of my being versus people's projections is how I'm able to have such like professional and straightforward conversations. Now, the other third part that you're not hearing about is like a therapist, right? And the therapist, if I can need to like just break it down or something, they can help me with that. But yes, in my particular role, I don't have the opportunity to I'm not at a place where I can like complain all the time because it comes with the territory in this current world and society that we are in. Black women are just seen as like just punching bags at some point. So it's really about taking that power and then making sure that you say what you need to say. And then if you need to escalate, you escalate, but get your facts right, say it with your chest, and that's that.
Thank you. Are there circumstances when, and if you do, what's the circumstance where you choose to interact and engage the audience partway through a speech, or when is this not a wise choice? Perhaps if you've got someone in the audience like we just discussed. But yeah, when and how do you choose to get some audience participation or engagement?
I love that question. Okay, I just recently did a panel 2 days ago. I was in Austin for DreamCon, which is a convention for Black gamers and anime folks. And we were doing this panel, and it was going on. It was, I think, like 35 minutes. And the panelists were really inspiring, but not all of them had like a sense of enthusiasm in their voice. So I thought, oh man, like if I'm getting a little, like if I can notice that the audience is kind of like, maybe I should pull them up a little bit. So I turned around and I was like, thank you all for the question. How was the crowd doing? And they all got a little nervous. They said, oh no, Bridget's asking us a question now because we're not the ones on stage. And everyone went, okay, yeah, they kind of clapped. And then the panelist went, y'all didn't clap enough louder for Bridget. So then they got involved and the whole crowd got involved. And now that woke them right up. It woke them right up and it made them feel a part of this moment. So for me, I like to do it in moments where I feel like I've spoken a lot or the panelists have spoken for a moment and they need a little bit of a break. They need to also find ways to engage with the audience. Sometimes panelists like to look at each other. They like to look at me, forgetting that there's a crowd that they're talking to. So it was finding a moment to like look at the audience. For me, jokes, I always bring it up. If there's a moment where you want to just like throw in a little joke, if it's a speech you've already created, find 3 moments or 2 moments to add a joke. If you're just doing something like on the fly like this, bring your personality out. The joke will come in out on its own. You don't have to really prepare like a pun or anything.
Thank you. We talked a little bit in our discussion about job interviews, but we have a great question here. How do you make a job interview feel a little bit more conversational? I think we've all been in that instance where we feel like we're just, it's going too quickly, or it's feeling a little robotic, or we're speaking too much. What do you, specifically to interviews, what are your tactics there?
It's a great question. I really love to start my interviews when people ask like, how are you doing? I really tell them how I'm doing. I'm not just doing great. I'm doing wonderful. If you ever hear me talk about how I'm doing, it's always the weather. I'm doing great. It's a really beautiful day in New York. It kind of rained yesterday. It's really musty outside. Didn't I do this with you, Samantha? And I did it with Julie. And we just went on like a cute 3-4 minute rant about the weather. Then we talked
I'm
about
from England, so the weather is always top of my list.
exactly. And then we talked about like the situation with like the planes and CrowdStrike and like that. You want to start it off like that. Once you start off the conversation with a little bit of like what is really going on in your life, it then starts to curate the rest of the conversation to be more conversational. If you just go like, I'm fine, okay, well, then the questions are gonna be very, sort of basic and logistical. But if you kind of break that barrier, because think about it, the person on the other side is just as nervous as you are too. They have to sit there and present themselves for this company. They have to make sure that they are, paying attention to you and being like intentional. If they can crack that part of themselves too, where they can talk about, yeah, I did this with my kids this weekend, da, 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 now the conversation is going to continue to start feeling a bit more authentic. And as you answer your questions, remember to always integrate who you are as a person, not just what you've done, right? The things that you've done are important, but as you are interviewing, the company wants to know, who is this person, right? They're also hiring you as a person. So the more that you can integrate your beliefs and your values and things that you appreciate and love, the more it's going to feel conversational and the less it's going to feel like very robotic.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that in interviews, that fit is so important to teams. And so, finding that opportunity to present who you are is really critical.
Okay.
We've got a question here that's, I think, kind of circling back about what you mentioned about sometimes feeling like as a Black woman, you can be a punching bag for not, for as a white woman or a white individual. What advice would you give as an audience member to help a non-white individual feel like they're in a space where, they don't feel like that, or that they feel comfortable, included?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what's important for like non-POC, non-Black folks to remember, so like our white counterparts, is that your intention of how you come into a conversation is very important, right? And so if you are asking a question, if you are preparing something, like preparing a speech, and you need some help and you want to understand, like, how do I phrase this correctly? Coming with intention, coming with research, already knowing like, hey, I've done some research and I would really love to understand, like, from your perspective, how does this feel, right? As POC, as Black people, we are not a monolith. So things that I may say, there may be a lot of Black folks who disagree. So understanding that our lived experiences are very unique and authentic, but when you come with intentionality and you come with, you know, a curious thought and not necessarily like a demeaning one, then you'll tend to find people who are very open-minded. I'll use my example. I'm an ally of the LGBT plus community, and I can't say I've lived their experience, right? But I have so many questions sometimes, and I'm very curious, and sometimes I can't Google it. So I have friends, and I'm able to always come in from this perspective of like, okay, y'all, like I've seen a lot of things about this and that, but like, what do you think? What do you think? And then you start to engage in a conversation. And there, from that moment, not only are you learning more, but the other person is also learning about your perspective and your world, right?
Thank you. So we have a couple more questions, then we'll wrap up. Tell us about some major faux pas that people you would just say, you know, two things: do not do this in any situation. And maybe that's through your own learned experience or just things you've seen.
Oh my gosh. I used to work with someone who picked up a random tick, and then I hated it. And then I picked it up too. And it was this, they would just talk and go through every conversation. They would just, and I was like, what are they doing? It was so distracting. You couldn't even be in a conversation without them going, and oh my God. And I picked it up. I picked it up. And then you know who else picked it up? Then my fiance picked it up. And that's when I realized, oh no, we've all picked it up. And oh my goodness, it's interesting because you don't know it until someone is doing it. And then you realize I don't like that. So for me, that's a huge thing, is when you start to like make these sounds with your mouth because you're just nervous, or it's just a habit that you picked up. That one is really, it's not good. You don't want to be in a meeting doing that. So that is my biggest pet peeve when it comes to public speaking. My other one, it's the filler words, but it's not bad when you do it once in a while, because sometimes your brain is just thinking. It's when it happens so often. I have a friend that I know who would sometimes like call someone, and through every sentence it was just da 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 da, and it was so syncopated, so rhythmic that you could literally catch it on time every time they did it. So sometimes there's moments where you do it so often again that you won't notice it until someone says it, and you really won't notice it until you record yourself. And that's when I learned that my biggest ones were like, and sometimes, like I said, you could say it's totally normal, but when it happens so often that in the conversation all you're waiting to hear is that person saying it, you got to get rid of that, child. So I would say those two things. And usually it's not when it happens, you know, every moment or so. It's when it happens oh so frequently that it's so distracting that you can't even have a conversation, or you can't even understand what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I think there's some things you just, once you hear you learn about it, you can't unhear it. A podcast on vocal fry, and now every time I hear vocal fry, yes, there's things like that, right, that are generational or that yes, are regional and things that, so I agree. I think recording yourself you know, is a little mortifying sometimes to have to hear it back, but it does help.
Well, also the way that we sound to our ears versus on our phones are two different. Yeah. It's two different things. So it is mortifying. You're like, that's how I sound like, you know, when you're like laughing, you're like, I'm cackling that loud. But it's important to, you know, understand like how your voice sounds and how it carries.
We're going to wrap up with one last question. And I think it just, we're going to just circle back with the nervousness, right? Like your one, excuse me, your one takeaway tip to combat nervousness when it's like, it's not just practice. It's you practice, you feel like you're fine. And then suddenly it's like, you're just overtaken.
I'd have to give two. One is not enough. You have to slow down. slowing down is such a good mechanism for your nervous system to realize it's okay. You have to slow down. If you are really nervous, your entire body takes over. You tense up a lot. So if there's a moment where you're just talking really fast, and then you gotta just slow down and listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth. I promise you, people will notice a difference in your intonation and how strong you're holding yourself by taking your time to speak. And the second one, I know it sounds dumb, but it's so helpful. You gotta breathe. You gotta breathe. You have to like really let your brain realize that you are okay, that you are not, a brain surgeon right now. You've got this. You're just getting some words from here, through here, out to here. So really breathing, really slowing down, remembering where you are, staying centered, starting over. All these things are incredibly okay. And it'll continue to teach your body that this is something that you should be doing, you will be doing, you will continue to be doing. It's going to feel like practice, and it's going to feel easy for something as simple as creating a TikTok video, doing a meeting, doing a speech, doing an interview. They're all intertwined in one.
I'm going to sneak my own little question in here, and it's something someone also tucked in on the audience. Are there different audiences that you're more nervous around? If you know it's going to be a predominantly male audience, a predominantly female audience, do you prepare differently? If you talked at the beginning about prep for your audience, give us like a couple of takeaways of how you might prep differently for an audience in those sort of scenarios.
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I'm in an executive meeting, that's usually where I am the most nervous, right? In executive meetings, you need to not only share what you're doing, but how is this performing for our company, KPIs, and that's a little scary to me because numbers get, I'm a little scared, but not numbers. So when it comes to being in more of an executive team or more like male centric team, I like to make sure that the story is a little shorter. I focus more on logic. I focus more on data, and I really change the intonation of my voice. I speak a lot slower. My voice range goes a little deeper, and there are not that many sort of like laughs and jokes unless they are interacting with me that way. I really try to follow their sort of demeanor, and if I throw something and it sticks, great, I'll keep doing it. So for an executive team, maybe a more like male centered team, I try to be a bit more on the like logical side, make sure I get everything in order. If I'm more like on a younger millennial Gen Z, like we're laughing, we're having a good time, we're bringing in TikTok, connections, and what's the cultural connection, and it's just different because within generations and how people also react and receive information, everyone is different. So really it's about understanding, will this community receive or appreciate more of the logic, more of the straight information, or will they receive something that's more funny, more lighter, more conversational? And from there, it's just then crafting like your voice.
Bridget, you're incredible. Thank you so much. I've learned so much today, and I hope that our audience did too. We so appreciate you, and you make the Gaucho community very proud. So thank you. In wrapping, I do want to encourage our guests to save the date for our annual day of service, where we encourage our alumni community to participate in some kind of act of service, as Bridget has done today. She's given her time in service to UCSB to share her knowledge with you, with us and with you. So please save the date for that. It's September 14th. We will be sending out a registration soon. And for those that register early enough, you get a really neat little cap to wear you do your beach cleanup or whatever that looks like. And we also have some really fun events coming regionally. Our Welcome to the City events are a really great way to highlight that we have an incredible Gaucho community outside of Santa Barbara in different regions. And so those will be coming up through August in Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Bay Area. And you will see those save the dates and links to register in the follow-up email communication that we'll send, which will also include the recording. And I'm really excited to see Bridget in New York in October, when we'll also have an event there for a Welcome to the City event. And also when you do get that email with the follow-up items, such as the save the dates and the recording, please do feel free to respond back to us with ideas that you might have for other Gaucho academies that you think would be of interest to you. But yeah, I just want to also take a minute to thank our team who have organized this event. We have Julie Mickleberry, Liz Hollahand, and Tristan, who is new to our team, and just we couldn't put this together without them. So I want to give them a big thanks. And yeah, thank you again, Bridget.
Thank you all so much. Go Gauchos. I'm so
Go
thankful.
Gauchos.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.